Hello and welcome to the Arkham Sessions, presented by Comics Alliance. This is the only podcast that delves into Batman the Animated Series with a psychological perspective. My name is Dr. Andrea Letamendi, and I'm joined by Mr. Brian Ward.
Hello there.
Hi, how are you?
Doing very well. I have to say that last week was a pretty fantastic episode, and it was evidenced by the fact that we got a number of people commenting on the episode, emailing us at arkhamsessions@gmail.com.
Sure.
And a lot of people said that there is a lot to say about Poison Ivy, but I have to be honest. Over the last week, I have not been able to stop thinking about one of the things you brought up regarding Poison Ivy, which is she a fanatic? And you had a series of criteria that was related to fanaticism. Mm-hmm. So it kind of occurs to me, you don't happen to have that list handy or right there at the top of your head, do you?
I do. In fact, the list is in my brain.
Okay.
Like many other lists.
You went to school for a long time for this kind of thing, so I totally understand.
This is why I have no other skills.
Okay. What was the first one on that list?
Persons who are considered fanatics, again, not a psychological illness per se, but more of a personality, like a group of personality characteristics.
Sure. Okay.
One of the first things that you'll notice with a fanatic is that they have this very strong, unwavering conviction about their beliefs.
Check. All right. What's another one?
Another one is they seek to impose those beliefs onto other people, even though other people may not even want to hear about it.
Okay, check. And okay, was there another one?
They have a willingness to sacrifice themselves for the cause.
A willingness to sacrifice themselves for the cause.
They're willing to be injured, even die for the cause.
Okay, all right. Give me another one.
They have a very black and white kind of rigid perspective. You're either with us or against us. Good versus evil.
Check.
That kind of us versus them mentality.
Okay. Is there another one?
That's basically the gist of it.
Okay, so 4 elements, 4 check marks.
I guess. Where are you going?
Batman is a total fanatic.
Oh my gosh.
Seriously, when you actually look at the 4 things that you just mentioned, Batman, whether you're talking about Batman or Bruce Wayne, what have you, the Batman persona is a fanatic on all of these levels. In terms of fighting crime.
So what is his? We know he has a mission, right? But what are his sort of undying? Beliefs?
We have talked in the past, in previous episodes, about his black and white rigidness, his rigidity, his inability to separate one thing from another. Like his personalities are, there is Bruce Wayne, there is Bruce, there is Batman. And never the twain shall meet. In fact, in this episode that we watched last week, that was Eternal Youth, we actually see him go from Bruce Wayne voice to Batman voice immediately, even though he's not even dressed as Batman. So there is such a rigidity there, very black and white. That one I say is an absolute check mark. He absolutely instills his beliefs of that black and white crime, good versus evil, whatever, on all of Gotham City, whether they will have it or not. He is, after all, a vigilante. He is technically illegal himself. The police are after him, all except for Commissioner Gordon, who is far more lenient because Batman is doing more good than harm.
He doesn't compromise his beliefs because of the law. Like
right.
he's willing. He kind of, you can see that he has these rules that he set for himself, regardless of what the law says.
Exactly. So he is actually putting those beliefs on everyone else and basically saying, number 3, you're with me or you're against me. You're either on my side as a crime fighter or you are a villain of Gotham or whatever. With the exception of maybe like a Harvey Bullock, who's clearly a good guy, except in that episode where Harvey was a potential suspect, Batman firmly believed that Harvey was a bad guy and was on the take, on the mob's take, on the payroll. And then only afterward realized he was wrong. and was willing to admit that. But for the most part, you're with me or you're against me. You're my ally or you're my foe. Then we've got what was the first one? That was...
just the strong belief, strong conviction in a certain...
There you go. 4 out of 4, Batman is absolutely a fanatic in Gotham City.
I think that's a stretch. I think that he has some of these qualities, but not to the degree. Now, remember, fanaticism is characterized by the extreme, right?
Willing to sacrifice himself was another one as well. But yes, you're right.
Yes. So, which he does, which we see him do.
Yeah.
But again, these are, think of these characteristics as needing to be on the extreme end for someone to really meet the criteria.
He dresses as a bat every night. He has got a Batmobile, a Batwing, an entire Bat cave with a Bat computer that talks to him. I don't know if you get any more extreme than that.
No, I mean extreme in his beliefs about something, extreme in his unwillingness to let other people believe in other things. Because, you get the sense with people who are fanatics that they aren't okay with, if you don't believe in the same thing they do, they're not okay with that. They tend to argue with you. They tend to want to get you on their side. And if you're not on their side, they see you as an enemy.
All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go into this week's episode.
Okay.
And even then, by the end of this episode, I'm going to figure out a way to have proven, once again, Batman fanatic.
Okay.
This week's episode, everybody, is Perchance to Dream, which, by the way, Kevin Conroy has been cited as saying is his favorite episode of all time of Batman the Animated Series. And for very good reason. It is a huge fan favorite. It was conceived by Laren Bright and Michael Reeves. The teleplay actually comes from Joe Lansdale, and it was directed by Boyd Kirkland. This was the 30th episode of the series, and it's the 30th episode of our series.
This is our 30th episode.
Yeah. So it aired on October 19th, 1992, and we see some old friends. Adrienne Barbeau is back as Selena Kyle. Diana Muldaur comes back as Dr. Leslie Tompkins. We've seen her just recently. And then, of course, we've got the villain of the episode, who will reveal very shortly. But it's someone we have dealt with, and not too long ago. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about this episode and why it's so popular. So this episode is pretty fantastic. We start out with Batman in the Batmobile, driving recklessly, doing as much property damage as the criminals that he is chasing. Everything that they seem to run through, not only does Batman run through, but because he's got a bigger car, just tears a bigger hole. Mm-hmm. And he eventually traps them in a warehouse. It is the Capper Oil Storage facility. And he sneaks in. Batman then realizes he was in a trap. He's blinded. And as his eyes are coming to, large piece of machinery comes in, hits him. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, Batman wakes up, and he is there in his bedroom in Wayne Manor.
I'm lucky to be awake at all. I fell into that trap like an amateur.
Trap, sir?
How'd I get back here? Robin?
Mm-hmm. And Alfred doesn't seem to understand what it is he's talking about. Well, of course, we seem to think something's up here.
Right.
So does Bruce. Bruce gets up, goes outside, tries to goes outside of his bedroom into the hallway, tries to go down into the Batcave. The entrance to the Batcave, not there.
The entrance to the Batcave, why is it sealed up?
Batcave?
That's when the real kicker comes in.
Son, you sound upset.
Thomas Wayne is alive and well in Wayne Manor. And Bruce then starts to realize something's wrong. Mm-hmm. The Batcave isn't here. No one seems to understand when I mention anything about last night.
Yeah,
my father is alive.
He kind of has a freak out. He runs to the kitchen sink and, wipes his face down. He's having one of those moments that this can't be real.
Totally understandable.
Yeah.
But then Thomas is like, "Are you okay? Are you going to be able to go into the office today? Because your mother and I your mother and I, which means Martha is also alive, we have an appointment of our own, and he implies they're going to go play golf. So Bruce Wayne is now in charge of Wayne Enterprises, although Alfred explains to him later that Lucius actually heads the company. Bruce is more of a figurehead.
Not that he's not capable of running Wayne Enterprises.
But you kind of get the sense that Bruce maybe isn't totally responsible enough to take over Wayne Enterprises yet. He's a kid who has been given everything that he's ever wanted.
Yeah.
And you've got Thomas and Martha. They're on their way to the links. This is an entirely new Gotham City. Drea, I'm going to start here. We should probably preface this episode because we can't really go through the episode without going ahead and giving you, the audience, the big kicker, which is that this is a dream. So what we are now seeing is Bruce's perfect life. This is where I would like to interject and bring up my first point of contention with Bruce's perfect life. Bruce still lives at home with mom and dad.
This is a product of his own wishes. This is what his brain has designed as far as what his perfect life would look like. And
in his perfect life, he still lives at home with mom and dad.
Well, I look at it like his perfect life would be one in which his parents are involved. His parents see him every day. He has a family. I mean, this is, no matter what his age is, his perfect life is that he has a family, and that includes Alfred. It includes his parents. It includes Selina Kyle as his fiance.
Yeah,
we later learned.
Yeah, we learned that he and Selina were engaged last week, and then just a few minutes later, we learned from Selina that they're supposed to be married next week. So apparently, in Bruce's mind, the perfect engagement, the biggest, most grandiose wedding is happening with about 2 weeks to plan.
Well, it's the Waynes,
They'll make it work.
They'll make it work.
I mean, the Kardashians took an entire season.
You can't even bring that in. You can't contaminate our podcast.
Clearly, the world of Gotham City, this universe takes place pre-reality television.
Yes.
Because the Waynes would have a show.
Interestingly, the one person that's not in his perfect life is Robin. Because when he asks, where's Robin? Or he says something like, did Robin bring me back? Alfred is like, who's Robin?
And thinks it's a girl.
Yeah. And that's, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. His perfect life does not involve this really important person he's mentoring. But
I guess it wouldn't. If the Waynes never died, then Batman would have never come across young Dick Grayson, and they would never fight crime together. I guess Dick Grayson orphaned...
Yeah, there wouldn't be a sort of this
acrobat.
healthy, appropriate relationship with Dick.
Yeah. Whatever relationship would be very unhealthy and inappropriate with Dick.
Well...
It'd just be like, the Wayne kid is now become friends with the orphan boy from those acrobats that came to town. Yeah, so there's no Dick Grayson. We can't decide if this is a good or a bad thing for Bruce. He's very confused. But he does come to accept it. He does, not only does he accept it, he's actually thrilled by this. He comes to realize that this is actually a great thing. He is hanging out with Selina Kyle outside of Wayne Manor, and what happens? There's a jewelry heist, and Batman is there. Batman saves the day. Bruce is like, who is that guy? And Selina says they call him Batman. He just arrived a couple of weeks ago. And it's not Bruce. So who is it? I mean, this figure apparently is now there in Gotham, whether it's Bruce Wayne or not.
Yeah, and he's quite good. They see this other Batman take down a jewel thief and then take down the thugs
in
the
broad
getaway
daylight.
car.
And he's very public about it. And this is the first time Bruce Wayne has ever been able to see quote unquote, himself, do this sort of thing. And even he is in awe of it.
Yeah. He admits that he's rather fantastic.
Isn't he fantastic?
Actually, yeah.
And there is this weird moment where Batman stops, he pauses for a moment and just kind of stares at Bruce Wayne, and they're kind of looking at each other.
Yeah.
It's a little eerie.
But Bruce still isn't quite satisfied. He still thinks he's going a little crazy. He goes to visit his old friend, Dr. Leslie Tompkins, who we know from a previous episode because she was there to console him after his parents died.
So how do they have this relationship if...
Well, she was friends. Remember, she was classmates with
his
Thomas.
father. Okay.
Yeah, so she's been an old family friend for years.
That makes sense.
So he explains to her that he is Batman. I mean, he comes right out and says, "This is the life I lead. I don't understand what's happening, but suddenly I'm no longer Batman. Batman still exists. I'm now engaged to this woman that I've really only ever known as Catwoman, and my parents are alive. Alfred has no idea about the Batcave, what is going on. You're the only person I trust." And she says that while she's not a psychiatrist, that it's fairly clear. Everything throughout Bruce's life has been handed to him. He's never accomplished anything on his own. And that sort of guilt has gotten to him. His subconscious has created a life that seems more satisfying, where every little deed that Batman does seems valuable to him.
Mm-hmm.
It's called disassociation, Bruce.
Drea, what are your thoughts on that diagnosis?
Well, it's not a diagnosis so much as it's a symptom. I think what she's saying is, in order to see yourself as valuable,
Yeah.
and a worthy citizen, and especially to meet up to these standards that your father has, you've created this hero. You're in this delusion. She actually says this is some delusion that you're living under.
So she's not referring to dissociative identity disorder.
No. She's referring to, quite simply, that phenomenon when you kind of have this, you create this break from reality, or you experience this break from reality that's certainly not grounded in anything real,
okay,
but that for, in your experience, in your consciousness, you actually think it's real. So it's very much like a delusion. So the way that she describes it makes sense, but I think if we were to look at the way that he's living his life as Batman,
okay,
if that, in its entirety, if that were a delusion, he would have serious mental illness.
Sure.
That would be considered a pretty serious condition.
Meanwhile, she doesn't think it's that serious. She just sort of, gestures it away, calls it disassociation, and explains that once he finds his own pride, once he is successful and accomplishes something of his own, those delusions will vanish. Is that the case? Does that sort of thing happen?
Well, no, not necessarily, because again, if these beliefs that he has, that every night he's putting on this bat suit and driving this Batmobile and taking down all these thugs, and he has these rogues in Gotham City that he's constantly battling. If all that was a delusion, again, he would be experiencing serious mental illness. No accomplishment, no act, no sort of worthy deed that's grounded in reality would pull him out of that psychosis.
Okay.
And so I don't know. I think what she's saying is that based on her interpretation of his version of Batman, so you've kind of created this like heroic figure in your head. I don't think she sees it as, you actually think you're doing this. I think she sees it as, you're daydreaming. You've created this figure. You've created this hero that you like to pretend to be.
Maybe.
And
I don't know.
that's not you.
Yeah, but he seems pretty distraught. He seems distraught over the idea that he doesn't seem to know what his life is in this particular world.
It's like I'm living someone else's life. I don't know anything about me anymore. Help me, Leslie. Please.
I think if that guy comes into my office and is like, "Doctor, I don't understand what's going on. My parents died when I was a kid.
Yeah.
You consoled me. my entire enterprise has gone to funding my life as Batman. There's now a Batman out there, and it's not me. I think if that guy comes in my office, I wouldn't just be like, you kind of created a fantasy. But she does seem very, I don't know, she seems kind of blasé about it.
She's very, yeah, well, again, she says she's not a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
So she's sort of conjecturing.
I'd start referring him to one, like, real quick.
Frankly, she should have referred him to a psychiatrist with his consent.
Except that Bruce comes right out and says,
Then the nightmare is over.
He now thinks that she's absolutely right. Because he said that she's the only one that he trusts. He takes her word as, written in stone. The guy is delusional. He now believes it, and he embraces it. He then goes and makes a joke with Alfred.
Have you found that entrance to the Batcave yet, Alfred?
I'm afraid not, sir.
Good, because if you had, then we'd both be nuts.
Somebody else's Batman. He does not have to have that huge, heavy load on his back. And he actually says, the nightmare is over.
Yeah,
Almost.
and then says to Alfred,
My life is a dream, Alfred. The best dream anyone ever had.
it's now the best possible scenario. Until he opens up a newspaper. He opens up a newspaper and can't read a word of it. And that's when Bruce starts to think that maybe this life isn't the life he thought it was. Maybe it's not perfect. And maybe he's right. Maybe it is all a dream. Mm-hmm. He checks the newspaper. It's all gobbledygook. He checks books. They're all gobbledygook.
Yeah, they're just like random strings of letters. Nonsense.
Some of them don't even appear to have anything in them. And
I just think that's the animators.
yeah, they just got lazy. He is distraught. He goes down to his knees.
No. You're a lie. It's all a lie.
But he rushes out of Wayne Manor, gets in his car, speeds away. He goes to the local hardware store. He buys himself a grappling hook, some flares, and a flare gun. And as he's leaving, 2 police officers ask for his identity. Ask for his ID.
Mr. Wayne, your parents are very concerned about you. Please come with us.
Very well. But not right now.
And he runs away.
He jumps over the car, runs away.
Well, I like this scene. I think it's realistic because if you call the police and you say, I'm very worried about someone, I'm concerned, they're mentally ill, they might hurt themselves, they might hurt someone else, they will send someone out. They will try to locate this individual. So that part of the show was pretty realistic. I liked that they included that.
Right. He then gets away. He uses his grappling hook, and one of the cops actually says,
Guy moves like Batman.
did he just inadvertently out Batman? Because in this world, they don't know who Batman is, and they just saw Bruce Wayne go up the building as Batman. Like, in this universe, in this dream universe, he may have just outed Batman. Like, that cop may be like, that totally makes sense. You know who I think Batman is? I think it might be Bruce Wayne.
Him.
We just watched him climb up a building.
With a grappling
With
hook.
a grappling hook. But he takes off. He actually loses the exact same cops again, but goes to a church. We see him drive or go through the cemetery. He goes to the church. He climbs up to the belfry. He doesn't actually go into the church.
No.
And like run up to the
That's
belfry.
wasteful.
He uses the grappling hook to climb up to the belfry. And he yells out into the night sky,
Here I am! I've been waiting for you! You did this to me!
Who joins him? Batman. And the two of them start grappling. Bruce is fighting with Batman. Drea, if there were ever an episode that required a psychologist to go into it, this is that episode.
There's so much going on. I mean, the fact that we know that this is happening within a dream, at this point, he's aware of it. We're aware of it. We don't know who's behind this and why, but we know that he's experiencing some altered state of consciousness, some kind of nightmare.
Yeah.
And here he is fist fighting with Batman, and it's an even match. They're going after each other. They're
and it's not just some dude dressed as Batman. It is the same Batman we've always known.
And
it's his voice.
It's the same voice. It's even the same kind of attitude. He uses the same Socratic questioning. So there's this very interesting dialogue between them. And within that fight, Batman tells Bruce,
You're not well, Mr. Wayne. You need professional help.
and that kind of that leads into us even questioning,
Is Bruce sane?
Is this some kind of delusion? Is this some kind of psychotic episode?
I just love watching this idea of, or right there in front of you, the conscious battling the subconscious. Because Bruce was fine. He was happy.
Yeah.
Everything was going well. Everything was perfect for him. But then suddenly, the Batman comes into the picture. And that's when he starts to wonder, I don't understand, what's the deal? I'm supposed to be that guy. And even when he sees that the images in the books aren't legible, things aren't real, he doesn't blame the Joker. He doesn't blame Catwoman or Poison Ivy.
Yeah.
He blames the Batman. He's yelling at him into the night sky.
Yeah.
And
well, he's essentially, it's like he's saying, you can't let me have a normal life.
yeah,
I can't have everything I want because I need you in my life.
Yeah.
It's an interesting dichotomy.
it's so sad. It's such a sad scene.
It is sad. He can't have what everyone has
Mm-hmm.
because this part of his life, the Batman persona, the Batman mission, right? The beliefs, the values, he can't let go of it.
Right.
Even though, as we said, someone in this fantasy, in this dream world, someone else was Batman. Someone else is enacting all of, pretty much Batman's mission and is fairly successful at it. So he doesn't need to be Batman.
Right.
Nonetheless, he can't shake that. He can't turn away from that. He is haunted by this, the Batman persona, the Batman personality,
Right.
And I would even say the fulfillment. Something comes from being Batman. You will not have a fulfilling life unless you partake in this lifestyle.
Right.
So so in that fight between Bruce Wayne and Batman, it is that recognition that I can't just be Bruce Wayne. I have to have, the Batman has to be in my life, and the fight is that struggle to the realization that he has to be with him all the time.
And during this fight, Bruce rips off the cowl and face of Batman.
That's disturbing.
The entire thing comes off, and we reveal the Mad Hatter, again played by Roddy McDowall. Now, we just saw the Mad Hatter a couple of episodes ago, so it's interesting that they've brought him back so soon. But I think it's great that we're seeing him again so soon because he actually blames Batman for his life going kaput. After Batman is back, after he wakes, now we'll talk about how he wakes up in a moment, but the Mad Hatter says,
You ruined my life! I was willing to give you whatever life you wanted, just to keep you out of mine!
Well, now we understand the Mad Hatter's vision, right?
Yeah.
So the reason he put Batman into this dream state, into his dream machine, was to get him out of his life.
Yeah.
And he says so in this sort of very tragic way that having Batman in his life has just made him so miserable and upset that he went to these great lengths to, I mean, he created this contraption and is willing to supervise this machinery where, you know, Batman is laying on this slab.
Yeah, just to get Batman out of his life.
Yeah. You know, because this really isn't about the Mad Hatter, right? This is about Bruce trying to buck this Batman lifestyle, but then realizing that he can never not be Batman.
In fact, the Mad Hatter is trying desperately to help Batman in that he actually, as the police are coming up to the Belfry, the Mad Hatter is pleading with Bruce, saying, do you really want to live the rest of this dream life, this perfect dream life that I've created you, living in Arkham Asylum? Because those people out there think you're crazy, and you could change this all if you just buy into it.
Right.
And he won't. Bruce won't buy into it. And this is actually where I think the title comes into play. The title of the episode is Perchance to Dream, which comes from the soliloquy from Hamlet, there where he's talking about to be or not to be. And that entire soliloquy I find interesting because that soliloquy is all about Hamlet trying to determine whether he wants to commit suicide. Is the life worth living? Or would it just be better for me to jump off this wall right now? And when he says the Perchance to Dream moment is actually the moment that his vision turns around, because he says something to the effect of perchance to dream, that's the rub. And basically what that means is I have no idea what dreams, i.e. the afterlife, might come from my jumping off of this wall. Will the afterlife, will death actually be worse than the life I'm leading right now? And by the end of that soliloquy, he is determined that it's not worth giving up the crappy life I have right now for what might be a crappier life later, or in the afterlife.
Afterlife, right.
So he doesn't jump. He does not commit suicide in that scene. Spoiler alert. But Bruce, after the Mad Hatter tells him that he can't get out, Bruce says, I have figured a way out. Bruce jumps.
It's great kind of how they show this, because it's not traumatic and horrific.
You never see him jump.
Yeah, you see him his affect changes. He actually smiles and he says, I know how to get out of this. And then he turns around and you know he's headed for the ledge. He
runs.
Yeah, and the next thing you see is him falling, but from, you know, the perspective is he's above us and he's falling.
Yeah.
And you realize what he had done was he jumps to end the nightmare.
Yeah.
He jumps to get out of that bizarre reality that he's living.
And you mentioned an interesting word there, nightmare. Mad Hatter says,
what if you're wrong? Then I'll see you in your nightmares.
He is becoming Batman even in that moment.
Yeah. I think he's pretty convinced that the way to wake up is to jump. And
it goes along with that whole you can't die in a dream.
I think it goes along with what you said about Hamlet, that I would rather risk this and start something or you know, potentially experience an unpleasant afterlife or nothingness.
Exactly.
If this is the life that I have in front of me.
Exactly.
I would rather take that risk. And it also kind of gets at that myth that, you know, if you jump or attempt suicide in your dream, that you die in real life. I mean, most people know that's a complete myth. There's no scientific basis to that.
Yeah, but that Hamlet thing I've always really appreciated, because he actually comes to the conclusion that what he knows is a worse life on the other side. His parents are dead. He's not engaged to Selina Kyle. Mm-hmm. He is the Batman. what he knows is a worse life is still better than what he's got here, as far as he's concerned. He's willing to go that leap. He takes the leap. He wakes up in the Mad Hatter's lair. He is strapped to a slab, a gurney. He's got a machine there. Mad Hatter can't figure out how it is he woke up. He says it's impossible. Batman fights off the thugs. And then he then basically takes on the Mad Hatter. I mean, you don't see him fight him or anything like that. It's right. Just sort of like, that's not what this show is about. This show is about him understanding and making sure he knows that he's Batman and that he reclaims that mantle.
And that, I mean, what you said is really important, and I don't want to overlook it. That he would rather live in the reality of being Batman in a world where his parents have been murdered, in a world where he doesn't have a wife or fiance, no romantic relationship, in a world where he basically lives alone with his butler. Then live in a dream where, as the Mad Hatter had designed it, and as Bruce's own neurobiology designed it, this is ostensibly the best it's ever going to be.
Yeah.
You live with your family, your parents are alive, you have wealth, you have your health, all these things are in order, but you know that it's not real. And
what I find interesting about that? Something you just said made me think about it. And maybe I'm looking too deeply into this simply because we have a podcast that psychoanalyzes this episode. But Thomas, upon first seeing Bruce, is like,
You will be able to get to the office today, won't you? There's that stockholders meeting, Sure. I'm fine. Really. Well, good. Glad you'll be there. Your mother and I have an appointment, too, this morning. On the golf course.
even there, in Bruce's own perfect world, Thomas and Martha are leaving him to go play golf. Like they're not going to hang out with him for the day. Like it's not like hey Bruce, you're well enough to go on the picnic that we planned today, right? Because we're all supposed to go play croquet together.
Even
or we're supposed
his perfect fantasy, his parents abandon him.
Yeah, it's like he has no idea how to make, even in his reality, his perfect reality.
I think you caught on something really interesting, and I don't know if we're looking too much into it, but in his attempt to create this perfect world, what does it look like? Does he know what one would look like? What do parents do?
Thomas and Martha go play golf.
Right. What do parents do with their adult children? How do they bond? How do they, spend time together?
But this kind of brings up the earlier point. In his perfect reality, Thomas and Martha go play golf. Bruce is the head of the company, but doesn't run the company.
Right.
Lucius does that. As if to say, Bruce doesn't really know how to run the company.
Right.
Alfred clarifies, not that you couldn't do it, but it's kind of clear a little bit that maybe Bruce couldn't do it because he's got that, as Leslie Tompkins points out later, Bruce has had everything handed to him. He's never had to run anything before. Mm-hmm. And he still lives at home with mom and dad. Even a week after he just got engaged, he still lives at home with mom and dad. So something that you and I have mentioned earlier in the podcasts is, has Bruce matured past that 9-year-old boy that lost his parents?
I think to some degree, yes. I mean, clearly he has. But again, I don't know that he's completely aware of what families do.
Yeah.
Now he's smart enough, and he has that awareness from the media and from some connections and some relationships he's had. But no, he doesn't have a really proper, complete sense of what families do and how they bond. And And so, yeah, even in this perfect world he's created, it isn't quite complete. It is a little bit flawed. And I do want to transition to dreams. This episode it's not, as you said, it's not so much about the Mad Hatter. It's not so much about this particular villain.
It's about dreams and I guess the psychology of those dreams. Well, one question I do have regarding dreams, apparently the reason Bruce figured out that the whole thing was a dream was that he couldn't read the newspaper and he couldn't read the books. And by the way, for keen-eyed observers, during the jewelry heist, when the thieves are leaving the jewelry store, you can't actually read the letters above the name of the jewelry store. It's all just a bunch of letters. So the animators were good enough to even acknowledge that in a second viewing, you should be able to put this piece together, which I really appreciate. But Bruce says,
I knew I was right when I tried to read the newspaper. The print didn't make sense. Yes. That's because reading is a function of the right side of the brain, while dreams come from the left side. It's impossible to read something in a dream.
That's not entirely true. There are a couple things in this episode regarding the neurobiology of dreams that are not totally accurate. Now, that part about reading is one of those myths that while you're dreaming, you can't read anything. It just shows up as gobbledygook.
okay.
You can. People have reported that they can make out letters and that they can read, but they're usually not prominent in dreams. You're not sitting down, and it's very rare. I've not spoken to anyone who sat down and in their dream have read novels. So written language is not prominent in most dreams.
Yeah, but surely I've had a dream where I've received a letter of some kind, and whether I read it line for line, I still understood what the letter was.
Well, that's part of the neurobiology of dreams is that your brain has made up the experience of reading something.
Right.
So you believe you're reading it.
Sure.
And what experts in basically dreams have said is that if you want to know that you're in a dream, like you're not sure that you're dreaming and you see written language, you should look away and look back at that. And if it's different, you are in fact in a dream. So one thing that we can learn from not so much the inability to read, but the lack of constancy of words and letters in dreams, it comes from this idea. So for example, let's say you are driving in your car and you come across a stop sign and you're unsure if this is a dream. You look away and deliberately look back to the stop sign, and if it's spelled differently or the words are backwards or something's different about that, then you know that, okay, this is probably a dream.
I have a better way.
Oh, thanks. Thanks a lot.
I take my totem, my spinny top, and I spin it on a table. And if it continues to spin, I'm in a dream. But if it falls, I'm in reality.
Is this some kind of Sandman trick?
Inception.
Oh, Inception.
You take, everybody's got their totem.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I forgot about this.
Yeah.
I know. See? So Batman did it before Inception did it.
Yeah.
Kind of. So Batman's inability to read or make out letters and words, not so much grounded in science. That's kind of a myth. The other thing he says about dreams being a function of one side of the brain and reading being a function of the other side of the brain, again, not so much grounded in science. In fact, both reading and dreaming, they're very complex neurobiological functions. They happen on both sides of the brain. So obviously, when we think about when you're reading a magazine or novel or comic book or something, there's a lot of activation on both sides of the brain, particularly on the left side. Now, he says that the right side of the brain is responsible for reading, which is not necessarily true. We have some important parts of the brain like Broca's and Wernicke's on the left side of the brain. That's for my neurobiology folks.
You smart folk.
And dreaming. So the neurobiology of dreaming is so fascinating and very, very, I would say in the last 20, 30 years, well researched, but not completely well understood.
So in fairness, you say 20 years. 1993 would have been 21 years ago.
Well,
So
right.
so at the time of making this, it's possible
No.
that the understanding could have been
No, at the time we knew that dreaming was not, constrained to just the left side of the brain, for
Okay.
instance. Now, we didn't know as much as we know now. Now we know there are so many parts of the brain that's active
Okay.
during dreaming, and we know that during what's considered the REM stage, rapid eye movement, that there's certain parts of the brain that increase in activity and certain parts of the brain that kind of decrease in activity.
Okay.
So, but pretty much across the board, there's a lot more activity in the brain during sleep and during dreaming than we ever thought possible.
Let's talk about lucid dreaming specifically, because clearly this is a case of lucid dreaming where Bruce is aware within the dream that he is in a dream. Even from the beginning, it appears, because he doesn't understand why things aren't the way they should be. So let's talk about lucid dreaming a little bit.
Yeah. So lucid dreaming is sometimes referred to as dreaming with secondary consciousness.
That sounds eerie.
That basically just means that the dreamer has self-reflective awareness, abstract thinking, volition, something called metacognition.
Okay.
I mean, basically that means, I know that I'm in a dream right now.
Gotcha.
I know that if I open that door, that thing will be there. I know that if, let's say, I jump, that's just in my dream. Nothing bad will happen to me. I know that if I try to wake myself up, I might be able to. So all these sort of things that you think about. I mean, I think it's very wild and almost Inception-like, the idea that while you're dreaming, you can sometimes control what you're doing in your dream. And in fact, some researchers are looking into this, the ability for people while they're dreaming to make decisions, to problem solve, to change certain aspects of their dreams, and even utilize lucid dreaming as a form of therapy, that for folks who have very, very bad traumatic nightmares related to real life trauma, they're taught techniques to be able to change certain aspects of their dreams so that they're less triggering, less emotional, less traumatic for them.
So basically, the entire A Nightmare on Elm Street franchise,
Yes.
where as long as they know they're in a dream and they control it, they can actually conquer Freddy.
I didn't realize how, I don't want to say realistic, but
Oh,
that's essentially what I haven't seen all those films, but that's what lucid dreaming is kind of about, is at what level of control can you take? And that has implications, right, for how that impacts you emotionally based on the content of your dream.
You talk about the therapeutic causes or the therapeutic uses of lucid dreaming, but how frequent are lucid dreams?
Well, some people experience it more than others. So the research that has gone into it finds that it's rare. Now, I'll be clear. There's a difference between having lucid dreams, like, being aware, okay, I'm in a dream, and then being able to control what's happening in that dream.
So people who are having lucid dreams still may not actually be able to control them.
They may not be, it's funny, they may not be yet aware that they can control them.
Gotcha.
And there are certain techniques which we can talk about in which people have increased their ability to do so. A large percentage of people have experienced some form of awareness of their dreams. So most of us at some point have experienced dreams where we are, we're aware that we're dreaming. That happens, to the majority of us. However, scientists believe that a small percentage, maybe 1 to 2% of our dreams are that kind of dream, the lucid dream, where you are able to manipulate, problem solve, change things, alter the reality, right? And one of the reasons they believe that's true is that it's a completely different neurobiological state than a regular dream, where you don't have those abilities. So the way they break it down is this. There's something called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So when I say prefrontal, what do you think about? Like I'm motioning to my head as if people can see this, but like...
You're motioning to the front part of your
yes,
forehead.
Yes. So
I'm going to say the forehead area.
So it's that front upper part of your brain, and certain related regions of your brain that are active during things like, when you regulate your attention, when you're, it's involved in things like working memory, reasoning, logic, all that kind of complex stuff. While you're dreaming, while you're, for the most part, in REM sleep, that area of the brain is not as active. I mean, it's not completely inactive. It's not like you're brain dead there. There is some activity, but it's decreased activity.
So that's the prefrontal area.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's really interesting is in lucid dreaming, that part of the brain is more active than in REM sleep or in REM related dreams where you don't have, let's say, the ability to focus your attention in the dream, think logically in the dream, make decisions in the dream, and so forth. That's when you know, again, that you're dreaming. So with MRI technology, this group of researchers was able to measure basically the activity of the brain while participants were dreaming.
Okay.
And again, so they're in a scanner, so they kind of later have to report that they were dreaming. This is all based on the participants. They're genuine reports of dreaming and having lucid dreams. And they discovered that, yes, while that prefrontal cortex, that area of the brain that we talked about, is less active in REM sleep than in waking states, it's actually reactivated in lucid dreaming. And that may explain why in lucid dreaming people report that they have enhanced focus, they have abilities to reason, abilities to use memory. All the things that we just talked about, sort of that ability to change what's in your dream or to have free will in your dream. So there is a growing area of research that is beginning to show that lucid dreaming is neurobiologically different than a standard dream.
So, but how do they know is, I guess, my question.
How do they know that they're having lucid dream? Like, how does the researcher know that?
You would. I mean, because I've done a little bit of reading on lucid dreams, and that there do actually seem to be skeptics that this even exists, because, frankly, researchers have nothing else to go on but the subject's own word that they were in fact having lucid dreams. There is no machine that says this person knows they're in a dream state.
Right. Yeah, it's basically the participants' report of it later. So when they are awoken and they're asked immediately the content of the dream and what they were able to do.
Right.
But prior to falling asleep, they were instructed and they practiced kind of like a signal to let the researcher know. And this is
like
kind of
like a physical signal?
Yeah, it's kind of cool. They were taught how to twitch their eyes back and forth in a certain movement that's different than what you might see with REM eye movement. You know, sometimes when people are dreaming, you can kind of see a little bit of movement.
Yeah.
They were taught a different movement for their eyes so that within their dream, when they realized that they could control the dream, they were immediately instructed, okay, I've got to move my eyes a certain way from the left to the right to let the researcher know that I am aware that I'm dreaming.
But again, skeptics have said that lucid dreams actually aren't a state of sleep, but of brief wakefulness. So it's potentially, they're somewhere in between and they have acknowledged, I'm kind of dreaming. I should probably twitch my eyes. Mm-hmm. Can the researchers...
You can never know for sure. I mean, they do measure brain waves, and every stage, there are stages of sleep, and they're able to measure when someone is in REM sleep. But again, you can dream in other stages. We found out that dreaming can occur between stages, and it's very difficult to really pinpoint when that starts. And Yeah, we go by the participant's own report. Just like when someone says they're anxious or they're depressed or they're hearing things we go by their report.
So in other words, the moment that Bruce fully commits to the idea that he is in a lucid dream, he then jumps off of the belfry, and then that's when he wakes up. So he has taken control, and he has determined his own fate within that dream.
Yeah, he's now that he knows he can control the dream, he's sort of empowered by that, and he has conviction that he can end the dream by ending, quote unquote, the life that he has in the dream that the Mad Hatter created for him.
So research for dreams has actually come quite a long way since Freud started 100 years ago.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Dreams used to be seen as, the gateway or some open door into our inner psyche, right? That dreams are representative of our turmoil, our worst fears, our secret wishes, those kinds of things. And, we know that it's not just psychological, that it's very neurobiological. And it's many scientists now in the field of neurobiology would argue that dreams do have some, they are created by a person's own, memories and experiences, but they're sort of, random firings of neurons rather than these, very deliberate, discoveries or, revealing our inner demons and wishes.
Gotcha.
So we've definitely changed the way in which we understand dreams.
Right. But has anything like this ever, have there been any sort of experiments or anything like that from your neck of the woods that you can think of, or any declarations?
Well, I think much can be gained from drawing from philosophy. We haven't done this a lot in our podcast, but there's a lot to say about what this episode really is actually about. It's not so much about Bruce's dreaming, right? Or his nightmare. I think it's more about, and you can argue with me here, but I think it's more about his decision ultimately to choose a reality that's maybe not as perfect, not as pleasurable, not as fulfilling in some ways as this dream world. And we've seen this, we've seen this after BTAS was out. So we've seen this concept later in The Matrix. It's sort of really, thrown in your face in The Matrix, right? But this idea of living in a dream world willingly versus unplugging yourself and living in a flawed reality. This decision or concept has been around for a very long time.
So you can learn Kung Fu in 5 minutes if you live in the plugged-in reality,
Yes.
but it's still imperfect. It's still not the gritty reality you would rather live in.
Correct. And why would we do that?
I don't know, because the Kung Fu thing is really quite fantastic.
Well, philosophers had asked this question related to consciousness and awareness and being plugged into reality for some time. Probably one of the most recognized and remembered concepts came from Robert Nozick, who talked about the concept of the experience machine. Have you heard of this before?
I have not, but I would like to because it sounds fantastic. Sounds like the kind of thing
Sounds
like the kind of thing you would see at a Pink Floyd concert.
It is. Well, interestingly enough, it was the 70s.
All right, there we go.
When he came up with this concept. But again, so he's a philosopher. So he came up with this concept, and it wasn't really studied in the way that psychologists would study it, but it brought up some really important ideas that we continue to think about related to our consciousness, our awareness, and our decision making around like virtual reality. So what Nozick introduced was this thought experiment in which we ask, or you're being asked, to imagine a situation in which we would have access to this wonderful virtual reality machine. it would be capable of basically providing all of these pleasurable experiences that we would specifically desire. So we are asked, again, it's a thought experiment. So we're asked to imagine that we were offered the possibility of plugging into this machine. And
Physically plugging in. Like we are now a part of the machine, as opposed to, say, the holodeck, where you're in the box, but you know you're in the box.
You are right. You are physically plugged into the machine.
Okay.
So in Nozick's thought machine or experience machine, we are basically in this virtual reality, but we don't know we're there. So when we make the decision to get there, we say, yes, I want to do it. When you're in it, you have no understanding or awareness that you are in this, in this dream, basically, in this virtual reality. But your experiences are all of these pleasurable things that you have designed, you've come up with. Okay? So when he brings up this thought experiment, he has us realize that it may not be as desirable as one might think. So let me ask you, if you had been offered this experience machine, what would you say?
So let me get it straight. Mm-hmm. The experience machine is basically everything I could come up with that would be pleasurable. Would I rather choose that, or would I choose my regular life?
Yeah. Which will not be as pleasurable. It will have the ups and downs that your life has.
So here's what I would liken it to. And maybe I'm overthinking it, but Star Trek Generations.
The Nexus.
The Nexus, which is everything that you could possibly... It is your ideal place. It's your heaven. Mm-hmm. Except that Captain Kirk jumps over this ravine on his horse. Mainly just an excuse to get William Shatner on a horse because he loves horses. But he admits that he had done this jump hundreds of times over this ravine in the real life. And in his real life, he had always experienced fear and adrenaline, and his blood was pumping.
Yeah.
And he didn't experience it this time. Mm-hmm. And that's how he knew that the Nexus was imperfect and that he didn't want to live here.
Yeah.
He wanted to leave. Now, for starters, I have my own philosophies about the Nexus, but just for the sake of this conversation, if it turns out that the pleasures aren't real, if I'm not actually feeling the things that I would be feeling that are better in the real life, then I would probably choose the real life. But if they were exactly the same or better in the Nexus world, I would live there. So I don't know. I don't know if I've got a good answer for you.
Yeah.
But it seems to me like the odds are against it being the artificial version being the good stuff.
Yeah, you're not completely sold.
Yeah.
And that's what this philosopher found, that most people, pretty much everybody, had said, no, I'd rather not be plugged in, knowing that in that machine, I would have all these wonderful experiences. I choose reality. And this was, supposedly, at the time, it wasn't necessarily groundbreaking, but it was it was a well-recognized argument against hedonism, which, if you think about the time, is an important, concept.
But hedonism is a real life thing. I mean, that's people doing, like, they're not in a virtual reality.
I know, but again, it's a thought experiment that this philosopher was essentially saying, see, if people were given the choice to live their lives in complete pleasure, in complete, ecstasy, in joy, they don't choose that. What they opt for...
In that case, I changed my answer. I would actually stay within the Nexus.
You want to live in the Nexus?
If hedonism, I'm in. I'm on board. No, but again, that's real life versus I don't know.
I think more so what was found from this thought experiment is that most people wanted they wanted to live in contact with reality. I mean, think about this concept. And I think it's what keeps me from wanting to be in the Nexus or anywhere that's a virtual reality. You want to be in contact with your reality. It's uncomfortable for us to have to, with the concept that you are plugged in somewhere, even though your experiences will be pleasurable and you will have no awareness that you're plugged in. Most people will choose their flawed reality because they want that, they feel more comfortable with that contact with reality. Basically, the thought experiment was to show that hedonism, or the idea of hedonism, is false. That, at least in the sense of revealing that pleasurable experiences are not the only thing that matters to us.
Okay.
That's really what they were showing, that if the idea of hedonism is that all you care about are pleasurable things, he is disproving that by showing that if that were true, people would just plug into this.
Yeah, you'll still die. You'll still get a cold. You'll still get the flu. You'll still die of kidney failure.
He's very simplistic about it. He says, given the choice between pleasure and reality, people choose reality. Now, you're smart. You're picking up on some holes in this theory, because later, just a few years ago, another philosopher by the name of Philippe de Brigard wrote about his own thought experiment that kind of flipped this very classic, experience machine thought experiment on its head. And he said, I don't think this is really about hedonism. I think this is about some other concept going on, because we are kind of in agreement for the most part that people do not choose to be plugged in, but I don't think that we understand why. I don't know that it's about hedonism or about the idea that people actually don't care about pleasurable activities at all.
Right.
So this philosopher decided, let's ask people, well, why wouldn't you plug in? What's behind that? And he found, and he did a thorough survey, and he found that what people identified was not related to hedonism at all. He said there were various responses that had to do with a number of different things. So for instance, someone had said, I don't really trust this technology. How do I really know that it's accurate? How do I know that it's not going to backfire? So the idea that the technology isn't foolproof, that kind of response. That's kind of how I react. Like, what if there's a power failure? What if something goes wrong? How is this programmed? So that kind of like logical, practical type of thought. Other responses had to do with the idea of what's pleasurable, right? So for some people, pleasure comes from novelty, excitement, problem solving, things that are unpredictable. So if you're going to program that into my virtual reality, how do you do that? By definition, it's undefinable, or it's unpredictable. We haven't created it yet, because I like to be surprised. So for that person, what are they going to create in their virtual reality? So things like that, those types of problems come up. And so this philosopher had decided, well, let's create another scenario. Picture that it's a Saturday morning, you've decided to sleep in, you hear a knock at the door, you're groggy, you get up, you go get the door, and there's this man in a suit who introduces himself as Mr. Smith. He tells you, unfortunately, that he has some disturbing news. This entire time, where you think you've been living your life, you've actually been plugged into a machine.
So it is the Matrix.
It kind of is the Matrix.
Mr. Smith has come to tell you that you... All right.
He says there's been this terrible mistake. I'm sorry to inform you, you've been plugged into this machine. Now, out of courtesy, we are offering you the chance to either stay plugged into the machine or to unplug, to have the choice to be unplugged and live your life the way you normally would. Now, what would your decision be at this point?
If my life was good, I'd go ahead and keep living the life I know. I mean, the idea that you don't know what is on the other side, it's just like Hamlet talking about the idea of, would unplugging myself give me a better life or a worse life than what I currently have?
Right, right.
If someone were to come and tell me, by the way, just so you know, we've totally forgotten and we've neglected you. You've actually been plugged into this machine this entire life that you've known. I would just stay here, probably.
Yeah.
Unless there was the promise of a better life afterward.
And he actually tells you, if you choose to stay plugged in, we will, reprogram this so that you'll forget that this conversation even happened.
Right.
Now, he adds in some other scenarios. So one scenario is the negative scenario. Let's say that this all happens and you're told, by the way, you should know that in your real life is not at all like your simulated life. You're actually a prisoner. So that's considered the negative scenario.
I'm staying here.
Of course. And in the positive scenario, you're told, oh, by the way, you should know that your real life is nothing like your simulated life. In fact, you are a multimillionaire living in Monaco.
I'm out.
So the results of this were very different than the results of the original experience machine. They found that, now, of course, for the negative scenario, the majority of people, about 87%, said, I'm staying plugged in. I'm good to go. In the positive scenario, it was 50-50. 50% of people said they'd like to go back to reality, and 50% said they'd like to remain connected in the matrix, if you will. And there's a neutral scenario where they don't know. About 54% of the participants said they would like to go back to reality, and 46% would prefer to remain connected. And
what is the percentage of adrenaline junkies or risk takers
they did not look at
in that group?
They did not look at that, but by turning the thought experiment, the original one, on its head, they found that it's not really about people wanting to be connected to reality, and it's not so much people wanting to have even a pleasurable hedonistic life. This really is about somebody's kind of ability to decide kind of what you're saying. Like, what is my life going to be? Is it going to be familiar? Is it going to be the status quo? Am I going to have the relationships that I have now? Am I going to have the ups and downs that I have? Am I going to have all of the knowledge and the skills and the abilities that I have? Are those what makes me me, right? And those are things that people think about when they are given the option to unplug or to stay in the experience machine.
So it's also the Truman Show.
Oh yeah, it's kind of like the Truman Show. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean this concept has not been, this concept has been covered in a lot of films and TV shows, going back to the Twilight Zone and of course Star Trek. I think The Cage in the original Star Trek kind of covered this. The original
pilot, yeah.
Yeah, it covered this to some degree.
For those that don't know, the original pilot, The Cage, involved Captain Pike being given the opportunity to have this amazing life in his mind, but in reality, he would basically be part of a menagerie. He would be he'd be one in a collection of beings from other planets and other races, but he was given the opportunity to have the perfect life with the perfect love and the perfect scenario, and he chose, no, I'm a human being, I should be free.
Yeah.
I'm going to conquer you. Good call.
Yeah. So, to some degree, I think there is some truth to Batman's decision about, I would rather choose a life that isn't completely fulfilling, that is flawed, that involves being isolated, that, one in which my parents are dead, than this supposed dreamlike, pleasurable, perfect world. And, knowing that it's a dream, I think that's an interesting decision that he makes. And I think it's grounded in some of these beliefs that we have about our free will and our willingness to be in a flawed world, and one in which we do have, certainly we have ups, but we do have downs, and we're willing to have those experiences.
You know what I think it's grounded in?
What?
Bruce's fanaticism.
Oh my God.
I think that he's realized, I have to be the Batman. It's my way or the highway. I have got to instill my beliefs on you. I am very rigid in this decision. And I'm willing to sacrifice the good times that I'm being given the opportunity to have for my belief to get out there to the public. So I could punch a few more red-headed thugs. That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking this episode proves fanatic. And with that, join us next week.
I've reached a point where I just don't disagree with you anymore.
I know.
But I do think you're
really
wrong.
Hard. Okay, well,
I think you're dead wrong on this.
We'll find out. I guarantee that over the course of the next few episodes, if not all of the remaining episodes, we're going to find that it's Batman's way or the highway, and I will eventually get to you. You will start thinking fanatic. I thought that this episode was absolutely fantastic. It was worth all of the hype. It is a fan favorite, absolutely for a reason. Next week's episode is also fantastic. Next week, we're going to have new villains to deal with the Cape and Cowl conspiracy. And we will have a bonus episode for folks who are interested in having a little bit of bonus episode in their life. And that is the new direct DVD and Blu-ray movie, Assault on Arkham. It is not part of Batman the Animated Series, but it is coming out next week on Blu-ray and DVD from Warner Brothers and DC in the animated universe. So we decided we're going to cover it.
Very cool.
So, Drea, where can people find you on Facebook and the Twitters and all of that other shazazz?
I am at Arkham Asylum Doc on Twitter.
Okay.
You can find us on Facebook, The Arkham Sessions.
That is correct. You can also find Drea at her website, underthemaskonline.com. You can find me. I am at bward028 on Twitter. You can also find us, you can email us at arkhamsessions@gmail.com. And we look forward to all of your comments. By the way, we want to know what you would choose. So if you're listening on Comics Alliance, below the YouTube video, you tell us, would you stay plugged in or would you choose the real life? Would you go to being Batman or would you marry Selena Kyle? We want to know what you would choose. If you're listening on iTunes, email us, arkhamsessions@gmail.com. We will reveal the results next week.
Oh, it's like an actual psychological survey.
I absolutely want to know what people would choose if given the opportunity to give up the cowl. Would they choose it? So let us know what you think.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
Until then, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
And we are
The Arkham Sessions.